items 4.1, the London Community Recovery Network, recovery funding business cases. On number appendix.
I'm sorry, you're breaking up. Councillor, you were breaking up just a little bit there. You were at 4.1. Could you just carry on?
How about now? Good. Okay. On the London Community Business Case 4, the London Public Library Reading Garden, I'll declare a pecuniary interest as my spouse is an employee of the London Public Library.
Thank you. So noted. Any other disclosures? I see none. Thank you very much. Colleagues, we have 4 items on the consent agenda, including the London Community Grants Program, Innovation and Capital Funding Allocations, Investing in Canada Infrastructure Program, Public Transit Stream, to do with the LTC Highbury Avenue facility, which includes an added communication from Mr. Bill Brock. We have the Diversion Pilot Project Single Source Contract Award, and we have the first report of the Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Oppression Community Advisory Committee, with an added second report of the Diversity, Inclusion, and Anti-Oppression Community Advisory Committee. Is there anyone that wishes any of these items to be dealt with separately for voting purposes? Please indicate. I see none, so I'll look for firstly for a motion. Councillor Hopkins?
Yeah, I would like to pull 2.2, please.
So noted. So we're now dealing with items 2, 1, 3, and 4. Do we have a mover? Councillor Pelosi, seconded by Councillor Fife Miller. Comments or questions on 2, 1, 3, or 4? 2, 1.2 and 0.4, or pardon me, 2, 1, 2, 3, and 2, 4. Councillor Van Holst, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And my questions are regarding, I guess, I see that the team provides 40 hours of outreach services.
Can you just indicate, sorry, Councillor, just indicate which item you're dealing with, please, for this purpose?
Oh, I'm very sorry. So yeah, this is item 2.3.
Thank you.
So we're looking at the Diversion Pilot Project. And I'm looking at page 18 of our written agenda, and where it describes at the top paragraph, the team provides 40 hours of outreach services. And I'm wondering if that's one person doing a 40-hour a week, or this is 2 part-time people, or it's some other combination.
Let's ask Ms. Scher, would you be answering that? Mr. Dickens, why don't you give that a go?
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Thank you for the question. The outreach teams are multiple people. They often work in pairs. So that 40 hours is of the time present on the streets performing the outreach. So that is as the teams go out and work with LPS.
Thank you. Councillor Van Holst.
Okay, thank you. So maybe I could ask for this clarification, Your Worship. The 40 hours, is that in total of person hour work, or is that there are a number of teams that are out for 40 hours during the week?
Mr. Dickens.
Thank you again for the question. There are 2 staff and they work 40 hours a week. So the 2 staff are on the street for 40 hours. Thank you.
Councillor Van Holst, anything else?
That's exactly what I was looking for. I had a question about there was a decrease in target crimes in the Corps, and I wondered if staff could tell us what those target crimes were.
Again, give us the page reference for the benefit of all of council if you've seen that in the report. I just find it helps all of us. Which one?
Sure, this is still on page 18
yes.
of the report. All my questions will be about this page. And this is the 1, 2, 3, 4, maybe 5th, bottom of the 5th paragraph.
Thank you.
It talks about a significant decrease in target crimes. And I'm just inquiring about which of the...
Understood. Yep. Mr. Dickens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and for the question. I'm actually joined by Jack Smith, who is program. He can speak to some of the targeted crimes. That language does come and is sort of depicted by London Police Services. just as a caveat. And most notably, they tend to look at some of the repeat property crime type activity. But Mr. Smith is with me, so I will throw it over to him.
Mr. Smith, can you help us out, please?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the question. And to through the chair, the London Police Services have identified a high number of crimes committed in downtown. So that's the nuanced crimes, property damage, kind of a frequency level. And those are the types of crimes that both the businesses in the area have identified as nuisance and high frequency. So LPS, we're following their lead in terms of the types of crimes that they're wanting to reduce, specifically in the core.
Councillor?
Thank you much. Thank you very much. That's encouraging. My last question here is regarding the next paragraph. Describes that London cares in support of approximately 20 newly identified individuals. And perhaps you'd remind us how many individuals have been previously identified.
Mr. Dickens.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and through you. The initial work worked with roughly 18 individuals, and then the London Police Service was able to curate a list of new individuals that you see represented in this report.
Thanks very much. Any other comments or questions that colleagues have on items 2, 1, 3, or 4? This has been duly moved and seconded. We'll call the question. Oh, sorry, I ignored the deputy mayor, and so we won't call the question quite yet. Go ahead, please.
Thank you, Mayor. I thought I was on the list, and sorry for the last minute addition. I did want to make just a brief comment on 2.1, the London Community Grants Program Innovation and Capital Funding Allocations. I wasn't sure if Councillor Salih was going to speak, but colleagues will recall that the two of us brought forward a motion to direct at least 25% of the grants towards initiatives related to anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, anti-oppression, diversity, inclusion, and equity. And that small policy change, I believe, continues to attract both new individuals and organizations into the program. As you can see, 5 of the 9 funded recipients have never previously applied through the community grants program. And even though the minimum is 25%, many of the applicants are focusing their applications around that initiative, and 57.2% of the total budget that is being allocated under this report is for activities in the anti-Black racism, anti-Indigenous racism, anti-oppression, diversity and inclusion and equity. So I think what we see is a small policy tweak producing big results, and I just wanted to raise that because this is the second time in a row that we've seen that policy change lead to exactly what we were hoping for.
Thanks very much. Any other comments or questions? I see none. We will call the question on 2, 1, 3, and 4.
Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Oh. I'll vote yes. I'm having some difficulty here with my e-scribe. Thanks.
Thank you. Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thank you. We'll deal with item 2.2 and the consent agenda. And I believe, Councillor Hopkins, having asked this pulled, you likely have some comments or questions.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. And as you probably know, I've been a big supporter of the West Leg, and from this recommendation, we are now moving some funds over to do the upgrades with the LTC facility on Highbury. And through you, to staff. Just would like to have a better understanding on why we're going in this direction, I guess, and having a better understanding about the need for this facility as opposed to the West Leg.
Well, let's ask Ms. Scher.
Thank you, Your Worship, and Ms. Palachny from LTC is also here and may wish to add some context around the need for the facility. This facility has always been on our radar as something that's integral to both service growth for London in terms of expanding routes, frequency, and number of buses that are available, as well as electrification. So it does provide significant citywide benefit in terms of growing the scale and size of the service and converting to a zero emissions bus process. With the recent change from the federal budget, which has required us to identify a project by the end of this month and have a full business case in by the end of November, realistically speaking, our plan to bring forward projects at the end of 2023 through the Mobility Master Plan isn't viable anymore. This project, however, is important, and it would have been in the suite of projects we brought Council to consider at that time. With respect to future improvements to on-street transit service, those capital investments in high frequency, high order transit, we will still be identifying those through the Mobility Master Plan. And then the intent will be to provide a financial plan that supports all of the many investments that the Mobility Master Plan will identify and be ready to leverage that funding from levels of government other than the municipality in future years as those programs are announced.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins, further questions?
And maybe, I appreciate the answer to, the mobility plan, and I know we're a couple years out with that plan, but I'm trying to have a better understanding on, where we are today with opportunities for moving around in the West. I do represent Ward 9, which is out in the West End, and that is an area that is full of development. It's only going to become even more challenging. The past 2.5 years with the pandemic and 3 lockdowns, the number one concern I still hear from residents is how we move around safely, not only in our neighborhoods, but the importance of getting around and the need for other opportunities. And I really don't want to go without having this conversation about the importance of the West Leg. I know it wasn't supported when we all were new on council and we came in. I really was hoping I would get a better understanding from my colleagues why the West Leg was not supported. I've never really been convinced that why it wasn't supported and the reasons behind that. I've been around a long time, and I recall London Transit coming to an Urban League meeting maybe 20 years ago with the BRT and the North, the South, the West, and the East, and the importance of how we move around the city. We all need to move around the city no matter where we are and have the same opportunities of doing that. And it's hard to go away and just go, okay, well, it is in the mobility plan for sure. I would hope that as we go through the mobility plan, the West Leg is needed. It's not should we or shouldn't we do the West Leg. It's a need in the West End on having opportunities to move around. I think of all the work throughout the years of coming up with not only the West, but also the North. And here we are now really not having a complete system, which does concern me, and I cannot go away without passing on my concerns and frustrations and all the work that went into that, all the consultants, the environmental assessments, looking at these other legs, and now we are sort of going in a different direction and not supporting, in particular, the West Leg. I am supportive, of course. We need a facility and updates, and as we look at electrification. But I wish I had a magic wand where we could have both options. And I'm really here to say that we need a solution out in the West. And in the mobility plan, it shouldn't be a conversation about the West Leg. It should be that it is needed in the West End. And I want to really stress the importance not only to my colleagues, but to a future council that may have to make these decisions. And again, just expressing my disappointment and the frustration on behalf of my residents that I represent out in the West, and the challenges and the need for us as a whole city to connect. So with that, I'll just make those comments. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions? I see Councillor Helmer.
Thank you. First, I just had a question. I think it's probably best for Ms. Pleshny if she's available to answer it. But in terms of the timeline for the facility construction, I want to make sure that if we apply for the funding and we're successful in achieving it, that we're within the realm of the construction timeline related to that funding. It seems to me like it's very likely, but I want to make sure we ask about that. We're going to be able to build the new facility before 2033 when the money needs to be spent.
So we'll ask Ms. Plechny, please.
Thank you. Through the chair, if we look back at the 2019 study, indications at that time were that this facility could be a phased implementation of knocking down and rebuilding on site would happen around between 3 and 4 years for the entire project. So should the funding be approved, that's plenty of time to get the project off the ground and completed by the 2033 deadline.
Councillor Helmer.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure we ask about that. Some of these other projects have longer decision-making cycles and a bit more uncertainty sometimes with them. So facility in some ways is a bit more straightforward, but I want to make sure we're clear about that. So I want to start by saying, of course, I support the idea of maximizing the value of this funding program for the City of London, and the transit facility, building a new one that's going to be able to accommodate electrification is a really important project. It's also a pretty expensive project, so that whatever we can do to bring down the cost of that for the local taxpayers, I think that's a good thing. And I certainly don't want to leave any money on the table. And in the interest of not dragging things out, what I want to say is that if anybody who in the past has voted against putting the west leg of rapid transit forward for funding has changed our mind, or any of the new members of council who've never voted on that issue, I think it's a good thing that we should be putting forward now. I would be happy to second a motion that was putting that project forward as well as the transit facility. Now, if we had the transit facility put forward, and the west leg obviously would still have a financial issue with the transit facility, right? It wouldn't cover the whole thing. And so we probably would have to figure out the rest of the financing. But as I've said before in other discussions, this west leg of rapid transit, majority of it is already covered with that Oxford and Warncliffe intersection project, which we already put forward for funding, which has been approved. That's a lot of the expensive part, is reconfiguring that intersection. The rest of it, widening Oxford, that's a good idea. That's just going to get more expensive and more difficult the longer we wait. And I'm not convinced that there's going to be lots of capital funding programs in the future that we're going to be able to take advantage of quickly. So now's the time, if anyone thinks it's a good idea. The reason I'm saying I'll second it is because I don't want to drag it out and have a whole round of debates if everyone's just going to say the same thing. And so if somebody who has voted against it in the past wants to change their mind, I'd be happy to second that motion right here tonight.
Well, then let's ask that question. Anyone that has voted against the west leg that wishes to have this reconsidered as per Councillor Helmer, they can certainly indicate that, and that would put it on the floor. Councillor Helmer, I'm going to turn it back to you. I don't see anyone indicating they would do that, but you still have time if you wish to make comments, sir.
Nope, that's it.
All right, well, thank you very kindly. Deputy Mayor Morgan, please.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to support the item before us. We know that the transit headquarters is needed not just for the electrification, but also there will be a point in time where regular service improvement and expansion will be limited by the capacity of the Wonderland and the Highbury facilities. And so expanding this does not only support the electrification, but also improvements to conventional transit and the capacity to make those improvements in the future. So I think that makes it a very good project at this time. And the extension of the federal deadline for construction that Councillor Helmer asked about, I think was very helpful in allowing this project to come forward. The master mobility plan process is going to set the stage for mobility and movement around the city for the next 25 years. And as we know, it's a 1.1 million comprehensive planning process that is going to try to align a number of our existing plans and a number of the new things that we've passed, like the Climate Emergency Action Plan, but also focusing on Safe City for Women and Girls, our commitments to diversity, accessibility, and inclusion, the old Transportation Master Plan, the Ontario Bike Cycling Plan. It is bringing together a number of plans into a comprehensive framework for how people move around the city. And although we, as Ms. Chair said, we will certainly need funding sources for those in the future, I think we're going to need multiple funding sources for that plan over the time horizon that it exists. Now, one of the positive things that I wanted to note that I don't believe was in the report when I went through it the first time is that through the Federation of Canadian Municipalities, you'll know that we have lobbied successfully for a permanent public transit fund that the government has agreed to create of about $3 billion per year, and that fund will begin in 2026. Now, the FCM will be obviously working with the federal government on the details of how that application will work, but at the very least, there will be a permanent new source of public transit funding that ideally we can access a number of the projects coming out of the Mobility Master Plan from when that funding source comes online. And who knows what other funding sources will be created at the federal level from this government or the next. So I'm certainly going to support what's before us today. I'm supporting the master mobility planning process as well. And I did want to identify for colleagues that there certainly have been commitments made to create permanent transit funding sources at the federal level, which I think we need to continue to ensure through our partner organizations like the FCM, the importance of that, as well as try to shape how that program evolves and what the application and intake looks like. So I wanted to add that context for colleagues today too.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions, colleagues? I see none. So for 2.2, we'll require a mover, please. Councillor Hammoud, seconded by Councillor Fife-Miller. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-1.
Attention to scheduled items. Item 3, there is one scheduled item, public participation meeting starting this session on the municipal accommodation tax on short-term accommodation, single source procurement. So with that, I'd like to have a motion to open the public participation meeting. Do I have a mover, please? Councillor Hopkins, seconded by Councillor Lewis. Thank you. We'll call the question. Councillor Elmer, please.
Sorry, I just missed this at the beginning of the meeting. On this matter, I'm going to declare a pecuniary interest as I have rented my property on Airbnb in the past, and I probably will do so in the future and be captured by this tax on short-term rentals.
So noted. Thank you very much.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0 with one recused.
I see gallery. I'll look to the clerk to see if we have anyone on the phones.
We do not, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. So with that, I'll look to motion to close the public participation meeting. Councillor Fife Miller, second by Councillor Van Meerbergen. We'll call the vote.
Councillor Van Holst. Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0 with one.
Thanks very much, colleagues. I'm going to turn your attention now to the report on municipal accommodation tax on short-term accommodation, single source procurement, page 29 of your package for those who are looking at paper. For those who are not looking at paper, it's still page 29. And with that, you'll see a variety of recommendations from the Deputy City Manager of Finance reports. So I'll open up, I know colleagues have read this recommendation, including the executive summary and all the other details. And I'll ask first if anyone has any questions with respect to the municipal accommodation tax. I see none, so I will look for a mover of the report with the associated recommendations. Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Hamou. There being no questions, we will call the vote.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0 with one recused.
Under items for direction, I'm going to turn your attention now to 4.1, which is the London Community Recovery Network Recovery Funding Business Cases. You'll note that we have several business cases included in this report, and I would like to ask if anyone would like to have any of these dealt with separately. Councillor Turner, please.
Your Worship, with respect to my conflict, I believe the number.
Of course, yeah. Thank you. Sorry, I missed that. We will deal with that one separately. That is the item relating to the London Public Library. Thank you. Any other items that the colleagues wish to have dealt with separately? Any comments or questions? I know I've asked this once before for any of the items. We will vote on the library separately, but any of these items that colleagues wish to ask questions of staff or make comments. Councillor Lewis, go ahead, please.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just want to comment briefly on the LCRN business case number 3, the Argyle BA currency pilot program. This is a really important program for the BIA. Colleagues will know I've talked a lot about the LCRN needing to be about more than just downtown recovery, but recovery for all of our businesses. And this is one of those projects that makes a lot of sense for the Argyle BIA. It's also one where we've had the opportunity to build off the success and learn some lessons from Tourism London's Stay a Little Longer program and the gift cards that were used to geo-target where those cards could be spent to make sure that the investment was in fact happening in our communities. So this is going to be one that's truly important for the Argyle BIA's member businesses recovery, not just because of our recovery from COVID, but we are also in the midst of a major infrastructure renewal program on Dundas Street in the East End. And that is, of course, causing difficulties in terms of business access. It has reduced traffic to the businesses along that corridor. This will help drive those customers back into those restaurants and retail shops and service establishments where we can keep those businesses afloat while the construction wraps up and help them rebuild after COVID. So I definitely hope that colleagues will unanimously support this one. It's certainly one that's supported by the BIA board. And we did see the success from the Tourism London program that we're building this off of.
Thank you. I'll call on Councillor Hopkins, please.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, and supportive of these business cases coming forward. I think as we support our businesses and residents as we go through recovery, it's really important that I'm so glad we have these funds available. And these decisions are coming from the bottom up, not from the top down, which is really important. I do have a quick question on business case number 1, which is the green economic stimulus. Very supportive of this. I would like to know a little bit more about the communication part, how businesses and how residents are informed of these of this opportunity.
Mr. Thompson, would you be the one to ask that question or respond?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. We have Marian Griffith, who's the interim executive director from the London Environmental Network, who should be able to answer that.
Ms. Griffith, if you'd go ahead, please.
We currently have 2 programs that are actively reaching citizens now. Green Economy London has over 50 business partners already signed into our program, and we reach them through a number of platforms. We're part of the Chamber of Commerce. And then our residential facing program has had over 1,200 individual home checkups already completed through our sustainability home checkup program. And we're starting our EnerGuide audit services as well. So we do have a pretty wide catchment of folks already that we're able to reach out to.
Thank you. Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, good to know. There's quite a demand out there. And another question to maybe staff, you know, as we approve these business cases, and there've been quite a few, and they're starting to add up, which is great. I often wonder, you know, sitting here approving them, how successful they are, and if there's any reporting mechanism coming back to us as a council. Not sure if Mr. Thompson can answer that, but just having a little bit more information would be helpful.
See, I thought you were going to ask him to add up the numbers, and I was going to go to Ms. Barbone as opposed to Mr. Thompson. But you got the question, Mr. Thompson. I wonder if you can give us some feedback to the extent you're able.
Thank you, and through you, Mr. Chair, great question. So once what our process lays out is once a business case is approved by council, the city and the proponent enter into some form of memorandum of understanding, and each of those MOUs includes a report back mechanism. So for each of the LCRN projects that council has approved to date, you will see a report back on the impact of that report. I will also add that as part of our overall reporting structure for LCRN, we have committed to an annual report. So likely what you'll find is in that annual report, which is identified for December, we'll have a report that summarizes the sort of ongoing impacts of projects like these. I should say too, you know, to be fulsome in the answer, there's we've agreed to and have committed to reporting twice a year. Council members of committee will recall the mid-year meeting or mid-year report that was delivered back in May, as well as the annual report. So there's a couple different mechanisms where we can make sure to talk about the impacts of these projects.
Councillor Hopkins.
Yeah, I just want to thank staff for all the work and LCRN. It's just great to have this group and the work that they do. So many thanks, and thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a question for staff through you. After this round, if it's approved, and looks like it will be, how much money will be left in the LCRN fund?
Should I be nervous asking Mr. Thompson, or should I try Ms. Barbone? Please go ahead, Ms. Barbone.
Through Your Worship, if all of these business cases are approved, there'll be approximately $2.9 million remaining after this council approval next week, if they're all there.
Thank you. Councillor Cassidy.
Okay, this one might be for Mr. Thompson. Will this be the last round of LCRN business cases coming before us, before this council is declared lame duck?
Mr. Thompson, please.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair. Great question. Yes, this is the last one of the business cases.
Okay, so
Councillor Cassidy.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Some comments. I'm supportive of wholeheartedly of most of these business cases. There are one or two where I question a little bit how much of this the dire need is there, because this is what we set up LCRN for, to respond in the moment following COVID, to help that economic recovery and get things going again in London. And we've done, I think, a great job. I commend you, Mr. Mayor, for your leadership in getting this LCRN going in the first place. I commend staff and all the organizations that have brought business cases forward. Not all of them have been accepted, but I recognize the passion behind every single business case. I think as we go forward and as we have come past the worst part of the pandemic and we seem to be well on our way towards recovery, I would like to see the remainder, and this will be for the next term of council to determine, but that remaining funding perhaps to be brought in-house to stop the LCRN network going forward, and perhaps put it as specifically, what comes to mind for me is the housing division, housing and homelessness prevention. We know the serious crisis that we are dealing with. We know that there has been great media attention to this issue right now. We know personally how hard our staff are working, and we know how hard community organizations are working in collaboration with our staff to solve this problem. Money alone is not going to fix it, but money is needed. So those are my comments, Mr. Mayor. It's for city staff, it's for the next term of council, that there is this $2.9 million fund that was originally designed for immediate relief and recovery following the pandemic, not even following, while we were still in the midst of the pandemic. And I think that we can put this to good use in trying to solve the problem of housing and homelessness in the City of London. Those are my comments. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you. And my sense is that would be the determination of the next council. Deputy Mayor, did you have a comment? Please go ahead.
Yes, on the business cases in general, I'll be supporting them, and thank you to the organizations who did the hard work of developing them and bringing forward the ideas. I did want to make just a brief comment on Councillor Cassidy's comments, because in general, I agree with the direction of where she's going. I think when we developed the LCRN, we really talked about the economic and social recovery and integrated those two pieces. And when the metrics were developed, there are certainly pure economic metrics and economic growth metrics, but there are also metrics on the other side of things about how the recovery is spread across individuals, about equity and inclusion, and the real social pieces of the recovery, which, although I would agree with her, London's economy is doing very well, very high growth. We've got, as we know, through sitting on Corporate Services Committee together, lots of interest in land, industrial land, lots of interest in bringing businesses here. But really that social side of the recovery, because we know it is very easy for recoveries to create income disparity in our city. And so I think I understand where she's going, and I think the way that we can really start to look at this is, let's look at the metrics on the social side of the LRCN work and see where projects can really enhance some of those metrics as well. So I think it could work within the LRCN framework, but I think the focus on the social recovery as opposed to just the economic recovery is really something critical for us to be thinking about moving forward.
Thank you. And in the spirit of not getting too far ahead of ourselves, because that will be determination of the next council, we have items A through F with the exception of D relating to the London Public Library. Councillor Van Meerbergen, did you wish to add something, please?
Yes. I actually, in terms of what you call, if just want to
just advise which appendix item you'd like dealt with separately, please.
Yeah. So Appendix C, so not, okay, so on page 44, number 3, Appendix C, if you could call that separately, because I'd like to support that.
Well, if we get a motion, so you know, so unless you're intending to vote against the balance of them, Councillor Van Meerbergen.
Right, I'm voting against the balance except for.
Oh, I see. All
For
right.
3 and 6. So I'd like 3 and 6 called separately on page 44, Appendix C and Appendix F.
Well, we're not going to split them up. I think we're going to deal with these as appendices. So we've got business cases 1 through 6, and
Right.
we've been asked to pull, by virtue of a conflict, business case 4, which I'll do. If you wish to deal with business case 3, the Argyle BIE currency, that's fine if you wish to deal with that separately, which means we would then vote 1, 2, 5, and 6, if those are ones that you have thoughts to vote against, and that's your privilege. But I'm not going to separate those out unless colleagues want each of these business cases voted on separately, which frankly, I don't think makes sense at all.
So just to reiterate, Mayor, it was 3 and 6 that I was asking to vote on separately. So
okay, so you're talking about the Argyle currency pilot, and item 6, which is the London Tech growth.
Correct.
All right, so that means, well, we're almost getting to the point, colleagues, of being able to do each one individually, but let's not do that. We're going to vote on 1, 2, and 5, and then 3, 4, and 6 separately, just because we want to make sure we're all paying attention, you see. This is all very good. So with that, I'll look for someone to move items 1, 2, and 5, please. Councillor Moose, seconded by Councillor Fife Miller. There's been enough comment, I think. Why don't we call the question on those?
Closing the vote, the motion's carried 14-1.
Thank you. And now to business case 3, the Argyle BIA currency pilot. I'll look for a mover, please. I have Councillor Lewis, seconded by Councillor Lehman. We've had discussion on this. Let's call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. I'll turn to the London Public Library Reading Garden access, and that was pulled by virtue of a conflict. So with that, in a moment, we will call the question. Oh, sorry, I'll look for a mover and a seconder. Moved by Councillor Hopkins. Thank you. Councillor Pelosi, are you seconding? Thank you very much. Then we'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 13-1 with 1 recused.
And colleagues, now the final business case 6, London Tech talent growth, and that was pulled at the request of Councillor Van Meerbergen. With that, I will look for a mover, please. Councillor Fife Miller, seconded by Councillor Pelosi. Thank you. We'll call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thank you, colleagues. That CRN business cases. Thank you, Mr. Thompson, for your efforts on that. I would note as well that in the addeds, we had two communications, one from Jen Pistorius, the General Manager of Old East Village BIA, and the Chief Executive Officer of the London District Construction Association. So thank you for that. Colleagues, now I'm going to turn your attention to the second item for direction, which deals with consideration of appointments to the London Middlesex Community Housing Board of Directors, which will require 2 members. I'm going to recognize Councillor Lewis. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Your Worship, and through you, and as the board chair currently at London Middlesex Community Housing, just as we did last time, the board subcommittee undertook a review of all of the applications which we're submitting using our criteria index where candidates are assigned points. Folks will recall that in the last round of applications, we actually did come back and ask for recirculation because we did not have candidates who fit the skill sets that we were looking for in filling the vacancies that we're going to see as a result of the terms of 2 of the staff appointees from the City of London ending their terms. Specifically, the skill sets that the board was looking to ensure were filled were legal and financial expertise. And so after a review of the applications that did come in, and the applications that were received the first time were reviewed again, in addition to 4 new applications which were received. And it was the unanimous decision of the subcommittee that reviewed these that Phil Squire and John Corby be appointed, as they both bring skills, both financial experience and legal experience to the table that we're looking for. In addition, I will share that Mr. Corby identifies as an Indigenous member of the community and has experience at the provincial government level with housing files as well. So he also brings a policy background, and I know the colleagues are already familiar with Mr. Squire and his background with Habitat for Humanity, as well as some of the background. I don't know if folks may recall, he used to hang around this building once in a while and showed some skills in regard to legal expertise there. So those were the 2 recommendations from the subcommittee from the board of directors.
And are you making that, moving that as a motion, Councillor Lewis?
I am going to move, yes, the recommendation from the board committee that Mr. Corboy and Mr. Squire be appointed.
And I see that Councillor Van Holst has seconded that. Any comments or discussion on the motion? Councillor Turner, please.
Really quickly, make sure that we're meeting the eligibility requirements for appointments to boards and commissions. I think this is a municipal service board, so I'm not sure if the same eligibility criteria that apply for municipal councillors applies to this. I just wanted to check with the clerk through you, Your Worship.
It's always good to check with the clerk because the clerk has wisdom beyond the chair. So we'll check with the clerk. Mr. Clerk, Mr. Schultes, do you have any thoughts on this?
Through you, Your Worship, I'm looking at the terms of reference specifically for the London Middlesex Community Housing contained in Appendix A. The requirements of board members as individuals and a collective in discharging their duties, responsibilities will act in an open and honest manner and in the best interest of the corporation, exercising care, due diligence, and professionalism. It ends there for the requirements section. I do recognize the question from the councillor, but I'm not aware of additional requirements for a municipal service board. I don't know if Mr. Card has any additional input on that or not.
Mr. Card, anything to add?
No, Your Worship, I have nothing to add at this time. I could say that the appointment can proceed on the basis of the clerk's advice. And if we learn anything between now and the council meeting, we'll be certain to bring that to your attention.
Thank you. I always love when someone has nothing to add because they add something, so I appreciate that, Mr. Card. Thank you. Councillor Turner, does that help?
If staff will make sure that that everything is good, then I'm satisfied with that. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Van Holst, is your hand still up to do anything except have your hand up, or did you wish to make an additional comment?
No, Your Worship, that's fine. Thank you to all the applicants, perhaps, and to our selected individuals.
I think that's well said in terms of acknowledging everyone that puts their name forward, whether you're successful or not in an election. I think it takes a certain amount of courage and commitment to community to want to do this. So I agree with what you've said, Councillor Van Holst. Thank you. Any other comments? We have a motion that's moved and seconded. Councillor Hopkins, please.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I appreciate the work the subcommittee has done on this and bringing forward these two names. I just want to ask maybe through you to staff, whoever can answer it, about the process that we normally do when it comes to these boards. Are we changing the process when it comes to this board in particular? I know in the past names have been submitted. We as council sort of pick, or we have gone through the process of interviews as well, but are we doing it a different way for this board now?
Let's go to the clerk and get that perspective. Mr. Schultes, can you add anything to the councillor's query?
Yes, Your Worship. The recruitment process is identified in Appendix C of the bylaw, and it does indicate that a subcommittee of the Board of Directors will assist with the recruitment and nomination process. That subcommittee is comprised of members of the board, members of LMCH administration, and community members. And this subcommittee would then submit nominations to Municipal Council for consideration.
Councillor Hopkins?
Yes, I appreciate that. I know we are doing it a different way. I just want to make sure when I read the agenda, picked it up, I automatically went through, okay, here we go, read all the resumes, and I always thought that the decision remained with council, but I do appreciate the work the subcommittee has done today. Thank you.
And thank you. And certainly if anyone does disagree with the motion or recommendation, they're certainly welcome to not support the names going forward. But with that, are there any other comments or questions? There's a motion moved and seconded. Let's call the question.
Closing the vote, the motion's passed 15-0.
Thank you. And I'm going to turn, colleagues, to item that's formally on your agenda to deal with the Argyle BIA, and they have a budget request. I know, Councillor Lewis, you wish to speak to it.
I do, Your Worship. The rationale behind the BIA asking for a business case is laid out in the letter in terms of being able to start working on identifying opportunities for CIP investments in the Dundas Streetscape corridor. Given that we have significant infrastructure renewal happening right now, we'd like to take advantage of the fact that when that infrastructure renewal wraps up, that's the ideal time to be doing the streetscape renewal. However, the actual CIP business case won't be coming to us until the 2024 to 2027 multi-year budget, and will be up to the council of the day to decide on that. However, I have spoken to our staff, and there is some opportunity to get some early work done on identifying opportunities that can be advanced fairly early on if a capital budget is approved. And so with that, I think that the best way forward here is to receive this communication but that we also ask our civic administration to prepare a business case for the upcoming budget update for corridor streetscape design that will help identify those early opportunities and can form a basis for the capital budget case in the following budget cycle. I've actually had an opportunity to get some wording for that to the clerk. So I'm going to look to colleagues for some support that civic administration be directed to prepare a business case for the 2023 budget update for a corridor streetscape design to help identify opportunities that can form a basis for a CIP capital budget for the 2024 to 2027 multi-year budget, and that the communication be received. And I would suggest that, and it being noted, that this may assist in identifying those early prioritizations that can be implemented through the CIP as the infrastructure renewal projects along the corridor are completed and those get wrapped up. So that's the reason that the board has asked council to consider advancing things a bit early. It's not exactly what is laid out in the letter in terms of my motion. I know the board had suggested drawing down the CIP funds from a reserve fund earlier, but I think that by just getting our staff to prepare a business case, letting us know what they would need to undertake the streetscape design study is that important first step. So hopefully I have a seconder for that, and then we can have some further discussion if we need to. I do know that our new ED is watching the meeting via Zoom tonight. She has indicated, and I know that we don't have a delegation status, she did indicate that she'd be happy to provide some answers to questions as well if council had them. But I think that if we can just get the study undertaken or a business case undertaken to start a study, that would be a good first step.
Before I take any comments or questions, I'm going to let the clerk, that was a mouthful. What I find interesting is the letter was dated June 20th, and here we are, July 27th. It would have been probably a little more helpful to the clerk and to all of us if we'd had that a bit earlier. Say 4 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. Anyway, we're dealing with it now, and I'll ask the clerk to tell me and us when that has been put into eScribe.
Through the chair, that motion is available in eScribe. You will need to refresh. It's moved by Councillor Lewis, and it will appear as motion number 2.
Thank you. It's been moved. Councillor Helmer, are you seconding this? You are. Thank you very much. Comments or questions about this? It's been duly moved and seconded. I see no additional comments, and Councillor Lewis, I know you don't need to say any more. You said quite enough, but thoughtfully, I might add. And so with that, let's, Councillor Van Holst, do you have a thought?
Yes, I do. So I'd speak in support of this. I think it's great to have this timing work out well. Councillors may recall back at the beginning of our first term, there was to be some road work done on Hamilton Road, which we actually stopped in order to do the work on the streetscape design and the community improvement plan, so that afterwards we could create a much nicer looking neighborhood, and we see that manifesting now. So I think we want to have this done so we don't need to slow things down in terms of the construction. So I think this is wise to bring it forward, and I'm happy to support it.
Thank you. Any other comments? I see none. We'll call the question.
Councillor Lehman? I think we may have lost Councillor Lehman. Closing the vote, the motion's passed 14-0.
Thank you, colleagues. Matters nor additional business. Before I call for adjournment, Councillor Van Holst earlier made reference to the people who put their names forward for the LMCH board. In fact, 15 individuals allowed their names to stand. And to me, that speaks to the issue of a healthy and vibrant community when so many people are so interested and so committed that they would do this. And I honor them. I'd also like to thank the folks behind LCRN, Mr. Thompson and your team. But for those groups that put business cases forward for consideration, and we appreciate the effort that goes into this. And finally, to thank our staff. You know, I'm back for a few days, and it's been a busy few days, but it just tells me how busy everyone has been in this last while. Ms. Livingston, please thank all of our staff for the tremendous work that they're doing. I'm going to point out particularly Mr. Dickens and your team as well for exceptional merit as well. And Ms. Smith for the polar bear, which we will talk about later. But for all of those efforts, I just want to say, I'll keep that cryptic until, but it's a polar bear, and London will be known for that. And I'll leave it at that for the moment. Speak to Ms. Smith if you're dying to know. With that, I'll look for a motion to adjourn, please. I see Councillor Van Meerberg, second by Councillor Turner. Show of hands, please, those in favor. That's a motion. That's a meeting adjourned. Thank you all. If the clerk says it's okay. Are we adjourned, clerk? Carried.
Motion's carried.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.